In the heart of the city, among the towering skyscrapers that rose like sentinels of steel and glass, there was an old hospital. Although its structure was massive and its main corridors were always full of life and movement, part of it remained shrouded in an almost supernatural silence. The abandoned wing, as it was known, exuded a sense of isolation that starkly contrasted with the bustle around it. Those who passed by couldn't help but notice the difference. The windows were dusty, some even broken. The sun rarely penetrated that place, leaving the corridors enveloped in a constant twilight. The walls, once white and clean, were now covered in moss and mold, with peeling paint as if the building itself were secretly falling apart. Cracked tiles on the floor echoed stories of a time when the wing was full of life. The few who dared to enter reported an immediate sense of discomfort. The air felt colder, heavier. They said it was as if time had stopped there, preserving an atmosphere of despair and sadness. The empty corridors were filled with whispers, low voices that seemed to emerge from the walls themselves. A cold draft swept the corners, and unexplained shadows danced at the edge of vision. Stories of a nurse who met a tragic end in those corridors were abundant. According to legends, her restless spirit still wandered there, searching for something or someone. The murmurs amid the sound of the wind were attributed to her, a continuous lament that spanned the years. Her presence was felt more than seen, an invisible weight that sent chills down the spines of those who ventured into the abandoned wing. No one knew for sure what had happened to the nurse. Some said she had been a dedicated professional, working tirelessly until the day of her mysterious death. Others told stories of a forbidden romance that ended in tragedy. What everyone agreed on was that her spirit remained, an ethereal figure whose pain and longing were imprinted on the very walls of the hospital. While the city around continued its frantic march, the abandoned wing of the hospital remained a somber reminder of an unresolved past. Those who ventured deeper always returned with stories of shadows and whispers, but never with answers. The true secret of the abandoned wing lay buried, waiting to be unearthed by the curious and the brave. And so, the nights succeeded one another, bringing new stories of nurses working the night shift, swearing they had seen the spectral figure of the nurse in the shadows. Footsteps echoed through the empty corridors, accompanied by the distant murmur of a lullaby. The darkness swallowed the hospital when the clock struck midnight. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, casting restless shadows on the cold, white walls. During the night shift, the hospital seemed like a world apart, a place where time stretched and the corridors became labyrinths of silence and solitude. The nurses, with their light steps and whispers, were the guardians of this magical and terrifying hour. However, there was something else that roamed these corridors in the dead of night. Stories of a ghostly figure dressed in an old nurse's uniform circulated among the night shift teams. Those who worked the graveyard shift, as it was known, frequently reported sightings of a woman in the distance, her silhouette indistinct but unmistakable. The sounds of footsteps echoed in the empty corridors, accompanied by the distant murmur of a lullaby, sweet and melancholic. Fear and curiosity mingled in the minds of those who encountered these stories. The legend of the ghost nurse, a figure shrouded in tragedy, spread and grew stronger with each new account. Some said she was a dedicated nurse, overwhelmed by work and stress, who had collapsed and died in the same rooms she once proudly walked. Others, however, whispered of a more sinister fate, suggesting that her death had been orchestrated by treacherous hands, and her spirit now wandered in search of justice or revenge. The night shift nurses, though cautious, couldn't avoid the corridors where the presence of the figure was most felt. Moments of calm were disturbed by a sudden chill or a shadow passing quickly at the corner of the eye. The hospital's atmosphere changed with the presence of the ghost nurse, and every strange noise or sudden movement fueled the stories and fears of those who worked there. As the nights grew longer and more mysterious, the figure of the ghost nurse continued to haunt everyone's minds. But the true enigma was only beginning to unfold, and each new experience during the night shift seemed to bring more questions than answers. Then came the reports of a mysterious patient whose descriptions of the ghost nurse were so vivid and detailed that they sent chills down even the most skeptical spines. In the dead of night, in a hospital room illuminated by soft, monotonous lights, a patient lay in a bed, his features marked by agony and fear. This man, known to many only by his mysterious circumstances, had been admitted under mysterious circumstances. His eyes, once full of life, now stared blankly at the ceiling as if seeing something no one else could. The patient whispered terrifying stories about the ghost nurse. He claimed to have seen the spectral figure up close, and his descriptions were vivid and disturbing. According to him, the nurse had eyes brimming with sadness, and her touch was as cold as tombstone marble. Every word he said added a layer of horror to the myth surrounding the abandoned wing. The nurses attending him could not ignore what he said. The way his eyes widened when he spoke of the ghost nurse was something that gave even the most skeptical chills. He described her appearances with eerie precision. The way she glided through the corridors, her old uniform, and the melancholic melody that seemed to follow her steps. There was something hypnotic and terrifying in his stories, as if he were narrating a hidden truth in the hospital's shadows. As the days passed, the patient's condition worsened. It was as if the ghost nurse's very presence was draining his life force. He grew paler and weaker, murmuring incessantly about the sad eyes and cold touch of the spectral figure. His rapid deterioration led many to believe that something more sinister was at play. Was the ghost nurse seeking revenge? Or perhaps, was she trying to convey a message through the patient, a warning that no one could fully decipher? These questions haunted the minds of the hospital staff. Each new revelation from the patient added a new level of complexity to the enigma. The line between reality and the supernatural seemed to blur in the hospital's dark and haunted corridors. And as the nurses tried to piece together the puzzle, a greater mystery awaited discovery. On a stormy night, a young nurse, intrigued by the reports and determined to uncover the truth, found an old diary hidden in the hospital archives. The yellowed, handwritten pages promised to reveal long-buried secrets. It was a cold night, with thunder echoing through the city and rain pounding furiously against the hospital windows. The young nurse, intrigued by the ghost nurse's stories and determined to discover the truth, decided to explore the hospital archives. The corridors were deserted, and each step she took seemed to resonate in the oppressive silence that enveloped the place. She entered the archive room, a forgotten and dusty room where time seemed to have stopped. With a flashlight in hand, she began to search the shelves filled with old documents and cardboard boxes. The air was heavy with the smell of mold and old paper. Each box she opened seemed to tell a forgotten story, fragments of past lives and long-buried secrets. Then she found it. At the back of a shelf, hidden among old medical reports and patient files, was an old diary. The pages were yellowed with age, and the cover, though worn, still displayed a touch of elegance. As she opened the diary, the nurse was immediately drawn to the meticulous handwriting that filled the pages. The words seemed alive, each letter a window into the mind and heart of the woman who wrote them. The diary's author was the ghost nurse herself. The entries revealed her most intimate thoughts, dreams, and fears, and the daily challenges she faced at the hospital. She described with passion her love for her work, her desire to care for her patients, and her struggle against adversity. There were also mentions of a forbidden love, a secret romance that added a layer of complexity and tragedy to her life. As the young nurse read more and more, she began to see connections between the events described in the diary and contemporary reports of supernatural activity in the hospital. Each entry was like a piece of a puzzle, slowly forming a picture of despair, dedication, and a cruel fate. The ghost nurse was not just a lost spirit. She was a woman who had suffered deeply, whose circumstances of death remained shrouded in mystery. The revelations in the diary suggested that something sinister had occurred, something carefully hidden that continued to haunt the hospital walls. The young nurse felt a growing sense of urgency to uncover the whole truth. However, with each page she turned, the feeling of being watched intensified, as if the nurse's spirit were present, guiding her hands and whispering secrets that needed to be unveiled. As the storm continued to rage outside, the young nurse knew there was more to be discovered, and so, she prepared to face the dark secrets the diary promised to reveal. However, each new detail brought more questions and uncertainty about where the truth would ultimately lead her. Then strange events began to occur around her, small signs that something or someone was trying to communicate. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, the young nurse knew she was just at the beginning of a journey that would change everything. The young nurse could barely contain her excitement and fear as she ran her fingers over the yellowed pages of the diary. Each entry revealed deeper and more disturbing secrets, weaving a web of mystery that seemed to ensnare anyone who got close to the truth. However, it was in the last section of the diary that she found the answers she had been seeking. The final entries were different, filled with urgency and despair. The ghost nurse, whose name was revealed as Clara, described a series of events that culminated in her death. Clara had discovered serious irregularities in the hospital involving patients and powerful doctors. Her efforts to expose the truth were met with threats, and in her final pages, she detailed dark encounters that indicated her life was in danger. The young nurse felt a chill down her spine as she realized that Clara had been silenced to protect dark secrets. The diary's final words were a plea for justice, a cry for help that echoed through the decades. Clara had not just passed away. She had been murdered, her death covered up to protect the guilty. With the diary in hand, the young nurse knew she had a mission. Determined to bring hidden truths to light, she began compiling all the evidence. The diary's pages, old records, and even colleagues' accounts of ghost nurse sightings painted a clear picture of conspiracy and injustice. As she prepared to reveal her findings, strange occurrences began to surround her. Objects moved on their own, unsettling whispers filled the air, and shadows lurked at the edges of her vision. It was as if Clara was trying to communicate, warning her of imminent dangers, but also giving her strength to continue. Finally, the young nurse called a meeting with the hospital administration, presenting all the evidence she had gathered. Her words were charged with emotion, and the truth about Clara and the hospital's hidden crimes came to light. There was resistance, denial, and shock, but the evidence was undeniable. Clara's story was finally heard, and justice began to take shape. Over time, the hospital underwent not only physical but also institutional reforms. The culprits were exposed, and the dark practices Clara had discovered were eradicated. The abandoned wing was transformed into a memorial, a tribute to Clara and all those who had suffered in silence. The nights at the hospital were never the same again. Clara's spirit, which once roamed in search of justice, finally found peace. The sound of footsteps and whispers disappeared, replaced by a serene calm. The young nurse, who had been the catalyst for this change, continued her work with a new sense of purpose and pride. And so, the hospital, once haunted by secrets and injustices, became a symbol of renewal and hope. Clara's story and her tireless struggle were never forgotten, serving as an eternal reminder that the truth always finds a way to be revealed.